Andrew Collinell, thank you so much for joining me. The border closures, how serious are they and what can the Prime Minister do about them?
Well, I think this is the most serious threat to federation, Andrew, since the pandemic started. I think with the words of the Queensland and WA Premiers today saying we are not moving on hard borders, even before this National Cabinet discussion on a hotspot definition tomorrow, the whole sort of hotspot scheme seems pretty doomed. I think we'll end up with New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia coming to some sort of agreement. But even this afternoon I learnt that under the rules they're looking at, and they've had to come down in order to try and get the states on board, Sydney would still be a hotspot, even though there's only 169 active cases at the moment in New South Wales and there's 7.5 million people there. I mean, if you think about it, the chances of someone travelling interstate and passing on the virus from New South Wales and Sydney, very, very small. And even then it would only be 1 or 2 cases you could get on top of. So the intransigence here of these states, Queensland and WA, and both of them are facing state elections and both of them have popular policies, is starting to become a serious concern for Scott Morrison. And how is he going to get them to change their minds? It doesn't appear he can. Is he going to end up in the High Court on it? Is he going to have to attempt to legislate in relation to it? If it went on for years, I guess he'd have to. But the hope is they can be convinced around Christmas when so many people travel interstate to see relatives. But all the signs are that that's not the case, and we have a real problem. And we're going to have a real problem with unemployment in a place like Queensland because as of September 30, the first tranche of JobKeeper, where you only had to show a downturn in your turnover as a business of 30% over 1 month, so it was a lot more generous, is set to end. A lot of businesses will be coming off JobKeeper. The majority of businesses in JobKeeper 2.0, they reckon, will be in Victoria because of the shutdowns. So there'll be a lot of unemployed people in Queensland. And if you got rid of some border closures, you could ameliorate that. There is absolute craziness going on at the moment, Andrew, with WA and South Australia, no cases. They can't travel between jurisdictions. ACT and Queensland, the same. It's just, it beggars belief that these hard borders are up in the fashion that they are. Now, Scott Morrison, ahead of this National Cabinet hookup tomorrow, he made a final plea in the last question on Question Time on it.
The support to the businesses who've seen their doors closed or have had their doors closed on them, Mr Speaker, as a result of the actions the governments have had to take. And it's very important for those businesses and all of their employees that we commit to ensure that we can get their doors open and we can get their Australians back in their jobs, Mr Speaker. Australia was not meant to be closed. Australia was meant to be open, Mr Speaker. Australians want to see Australia become open as the founding members, Mr Speaker, of this place ensured it was from the outset, and Australia must become whole again, Mr Speaker. This is the way. That's what success looks like.
Andrew, I just want to pick up on one thing you said before that. Western Australia has banned travel even from South Australia, which has 0 active cases of coronavirus. I mean, when you get that kind of absolutism, I can't see this frenzy to ban things ending anytime soon.
Well, the front page of the West Australian today says Mr 91%. It has a research poll, which is not theirs but affirms, which has McGowan's approval as Premier at 91% and his hard borders at 92% approval. So that's the concern, that he won't ever change his mind because he'll want to keep up these approval levels, especially prior to the March state election. But he should show some leadership and say, with baby steps, let's start a trial of opening up to South Australia and see how that goes and see if any virus sneaks in. Because at the moment, there's much more chance of hotel quarantine from people coming from overseas to Perth, allowing the virus to escape, than there is if they open the border to Adelaide and Darwin for that matter. Those are the first steps that Mark McGowan should take immediately. There's no excuse not to, as far as I'm concerned, Andrew.
Absolutely none. And you've got to say, you know, maybe they should think of their support as not just endorsement for what they've done, so let's keep doing these destructive and pointless things, but maybe let's use that respect that we've got to actually do the right thing, the brave thing. Queensland's Premier says New South Wales has got to have 0 new infections for a long time before that border ban will be lifted. The New South Wales Premier said that means the borders will be closed for a long time. Here she is.
I have also heard the targets which the Queensland government is setting for when they're likely to open the border. I don't know if we'll ever get to that case, to that number. They're putting on us a pretty big ask during a pandemic, and I'll ask them to look closely at that.
So, given all this, when do you think Scott Morrison will get his dream of an Australia without border bans?
Well, I think today, for the first time, I became really concerned about that. I mean, we saw Queensland open its border to New South Wales in July for the second week of school holidays, then shut it again. So I think from that I was lulled into thinking, oh, well, borders will eventually come down. But now I'm starting to get pretty concerned, Andrew, I've got to say, because Anastasia Palaszczuk is going to campaign on border closures. So how are they going to open after that? Look, I've got family in Perth. I usually go there for Christmas with my wife and kids. I have a friend who has family in Brisbane. I have another friend who has family in Melbourne. This affects so many people that you know. It just affects so many people. Thousands of people go across the New South Wales-Queensland border at Christmas time. That creates jobs. It sees families reunite. Morrison and his government's belief is the best hope they can have to appeal to the premiers is around that Christmas theme, that community sentiment might change then on it. But if the premiers continue this hard border stance, effectively telling their community that you can have no virus and that's acceptable, that's what we should be aiming for, community sentiment's not going to change and therefore the premiers don't change. It almost becomes this vicious circle. And until you get a vaccine, you can't guarantee that. Scott Morrison's showing New South Wales and Gladys Berejiklian as the gold standard where you have this really low number of cases and you clamp on all the contacts. It is, because unfortunately we're going to have to live with the virus. If you can keep it to such small cases that you're extremely unlikely to contract the virus, that's where you're going to have to be at, I think. It's unrealistic to have elimination. Otherwise, we might as well become separate countries, Andrew, and Queensland and WA may as well get their own defence forces. I mean, that's where we're at. This is a serious issue in terms of our federation now. We're going to come up to a year of this at the rate it's going. And it's unsatisfactory, but even if you don't agree with me on the New South Wales example, 169 active cases in 7.5 million people, surely anyone watching would have to agree on WA and South Australia, ACT and Queensland, etc. It just seems to be craziness to shut borders even when there's no virus.
Politicians stoked the fears and now they're feeding the false hope that there's going to be a vaccine very soon. Well, even if a vaccine comes in a year or 2 years, however long it takes, it probably will be only partially effective, and I don't think we'll still be at the absolute certainty that some of these premiers are demanding. We have dug ourselves into a deep hole. Andrew Clennell, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.